getting more work for yourself to keep your schedule full. And secondly, it's also because clients can drop you at any time, meaning that one day you've been working with this client, but the next day they say, oh, sorry, we don't need your services anymore. And because of that, you've just lost your source of freelance revenue. And sometimes all these reasons why they drop you has nothing to do with you at all. Like, it's completely not your fault, but it's just they just don't need you. Maybe there's been a change of management, and management says, okay, from now on, we're going to do all our work in-house. We're not going to outsource the work to freelancers. And so from there, the clients tell you, sorry, we can't work with you anymore. Or maybe there are budget cuts, so the client no longer has budget to hire you, which means you've just lost that client as well. And again, it's just completely not due to anything that's your fault. And sometimes maybe the client just stops having work for you to do. Like, I had this experience relatively recently. Like, I had one client who started writing for in June, and then for the next 6 months until December, I got quite a regular stream of work from him. But then after New Year in January, I submitted the last assignment, and then I just stopped hearing from him. And from my previous messages with him, I kind of gathered that he was running out of things to assign me to write on. So I wasn't too surprised when he suddenly stopped assigning me new work. Fortunately, actually, last week he just contacted me to ask about resuming our work arrangement, so that's great. But the point is that, yeah, you never know when a client is going to drop you, and so you need to constantly be prospecting for work, so that in this event that this has happened, you will already have other clients coming in and interested to work with you. So you keep your pipeline full, and you also keep your revenue up. And finally, even if you're full, you should still try to prospect for new clients, because it's a great opportunity for you to raise your rates, and substantially as well. Because if let's say you try to raise your rates for existing clients, maybe at most you can raise your rates by like 10 or 20%. You try to do more than that, maybe 20, 30, even 50%. The client's going to look at you and say, why are you trying to raise your rates by so much? But then if you're approaching a new client, they might not know your rates already, and so this is your chance to propose a new rate that is somewhat higher than what you've been charging your existing clients. And then if they accept, then congrats, you've just given yourself a pay raise. But then in this case, so what can you do when you take on a new client but you're already full and you can't really take on more work? So this is where you can look into outsourcing. So maybe you outsource some of your existing work to other freelancers, and then, or you can also look at slowly referring your other clients out to other freelancers. So in this case, you free up your bandwidth and your capacity to take on higher paying work. So finally, after knowing it's important to always be prospecting, how exactly can you do so? I think the method would depend on your industry. Maybe some industries will have some methods that work better than others, but generally I would suggest doing a mixture of inbound and outbound methods. So inbound would be like the client just comes to you for work, which is great because it's less effort on your part. So maybe the client is referred to you by word of mouth. But I find that even in inbound methods, it's not as if you can just sit around and twiddle your thumbs and then the clients will just magically fall out of the sky and approach you for work. Usually there's some promotional methods that you've done in advance which led to people knowing that you offer such services in the first place. Like maybe you've been promoting yourself on social media, and then one of your friends sees your social media posts promoting your work. So maybe your friend himself or herself doesn't need your services, but then they know someone who is actually looking for a freelancer who offers the services that they are looking for. In that case, that friend can recommend you and say, hey, I know this person who is offering this service, and therefore maybe you want to check out what they are doing. And so from there you get more work. That's inbound methods. But for outbound methods, so instead of the clients coming you to for work, you are going to approach potential clients for work. So meaning that maybe you send cold emails to businesses saying that, hi, this is what I do, and then you offer to work with them, or you can go to job boards. So this is great because here you know that clients are already actively looking for freelancers. It's just whether you can find the work that is suitable for what you do and at a suitable price point. So this is the end of the first section on always be prospecting. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Otherwise, I'll go into the second one, which is on having a basic understanding of contracts. Right, so I think right off the bat, it's important to clarify some misconceptions on what a contract is, because many people think that a contract is this formal written document that has the words contract at the very top. But in legal terms, this is actually not what the contract is. So the contract is actually the agreement between two or more parties that creates an obligation to do something or to not do something. So maybe if you're a freelancer, you're a freelance photographer, you agree to help this client take their wedding shoot on this day at this location. So this agreement itself is the contract. It's not the piece of paper that the contract is written on. And so this means that generally contracts don't need to be in writing in order to be effective, because it's only a few categories of contracts in law that need to be in writing in order to be effective. But I think for most freelance contracts, that's not the case. Like, as long as there is a verbal agreement, it's usually a valid contract form. So in case you have some clients who try to say that, I don't need to pay you because we didn't have a contract, that's most probably not true, because there will probably already have been an agreement formed between you and the client about the work. But the only problem is whether you can prove that such a contract exists. Which is why I suggest that even if though it's not legally compulsory to have your contract written in writing, you still want to put it down in writing for these reasons. Like, number one, because you want to have both parties on the same page with respect to the scope of the project, especially if your project is going to be very complex. So you want to put down the terms in writing so that both parties can examine the terms, make sure that the terms are in line with what they think the project is about. And then if there are any misunderstandings, you can catch these up front and amend the contract, make sure it reflects what both parties are thinking. And secondly, it's also so that you have a record of what's going on in this project, because people are not perfect, we might forget things along the way, and so having this written record helps you have something to fall back on in case you can't remember exactly what was agreed on. Or even if, let's say, you have a client who forgot what happened, in the sense that they're trying to pull a fast one on you, and then so you need to have some kind of evidence that you can show your client and say, hey, this is what we agreed on in the past, and I would appreciate it if we can stick to this arrangement. And so as a result of all this, by having a written contract, you will be able to minimize the occurrence of disputes and misunderstandings. Like, if you have everything clear up front and then both parties are on the same page of what's going on, there'll be less disputes that will arise. Or even if there are disputes, maybe your contract will state how exactly such disputes can be resolved. So it just helps to keep the relationship as amicable and the project going as smoothly as possible. So when you're doing your written record of the contract, you can do that formal long document that has the word contract at the top, but even emails and text exchanges are good enough to constitute records of contracts. So again, if your client says that, but we didn't sign any document that has the word contract on top, but as long as you have some kind of emails or text exchanges, those still can be good evidence of the contract that you can use to prove what was agreed on between you and your client. And now I'll just go through some basic terms that I think you should have in your written contract. So first, definitely you want to put down the details of the parties. So who is getting into this project with who, name and a UEN. So if you have not already registered your freelance business, you might not have a UEN or unique entity number, which in this case you should put down your NRIC instead. So but then for data privacy reasons, maybe you can just put down the last 3 letters and the alphabet. And it's very important to be very precise on who is actually getting into the contract, because for legal liability reasons, let's say if you're a freelancer and you have incorporated a company, so in this case your project should always be between the client and your company instead of your personal name, for legal liability reasons, because just in case, touch wood, the client does want to sue you over a dispute for the project. In this case, they will have to sue your company instead if the contract is between them and your company, and this will help limit your legal liability, because the client will only be able to sue for the amount up to the share capital in the company and will not be able to go after your personal assets. So this is really to protect you in the case that such legal disputes do occur. And then next, you want to definitely put down the deliverable. So what exactly is the scope of the project? If you're running a workshop, you could put down, I promise to conduct this workshop for this client on this date and at this location. So just try to be as specific as possible when you're stating the deliverables, especially if there's quite a few of them that you've agreed to provide. And very importantly, payment terms, because you're not working for free. You want to put down how much you're getting paid for this project, how you're going to collect payment for this project. So it can be cash, check, bank transfer, pay now, credit card. And you should also put down the deadline for making payment. So this one depends on how you've agreed with the client you'll be taking payment. Are you going to take 100% at the end of the project, or are you going to do 50 upfront, 50% at the end, or are you going to do like payment milestones? So every time a certain milestone is reached, you've completed a certain number of deliverables, then the client has to release payment before you start on the next milestone. And then also intellectual property. So who's going to own the IP and the materials created? Generally, for most freelance contracts, the client will want to own the IP, because after you've done the work, they want to be able to use your work for whatever business purposes that they want. So in this case, if you get a contract from a client, they'll most likely say that the freelancer agrees to assign the IP in the works created to the client. But in this case, it's also good to try and get a license, or at least permission from the client to use the work in your portfolio for professional advancement purposes. So you can show the work to future clients and hopefully try to get more work from there. And likewise, so whether the materials can be freely disseminated. So maybe this is more relevant for workshops where you're creating materials or slides as part of conducting a workshop. And then, so will the slides and materials be freely given to the attendees at the end of the workshop? Or maybe you're going to share a redacted copy with some of the more sensitive information removed. So be sure to discuss all these with your client upfront, and then put your agreement into the written record of the contract. Next up, we have confidentiality, especially for clients when they might have, in the course of working with you, they might need to share with you some confidential information that they definitely don't want the whole world to know about at this point in time. So they will probably try to get from you a promise to say that you will not share this information with third parties unless you're required to. Like maybe there's an exception where you're being compelled by a court of law to disclose information, then in that case, you have no choice but to disclose. Or alternatively, maybe if the information has been released in the public domain, like if the company is working on a new feature which has been launched, then you can of course freely talk about your work for that feature. And then next we have force majeure. So this is a legal term which means certain circumstances which happen which are beyond both parties' control, but which prevent one or both of you from fulfilling your obligations under the contract. So basically it's just about putting in contingency or backup plans in case things don't work out as planned. So for example, if you fall sick and then you can't complete the work, then what's going to happen in this situation? Or let's say you're supposed to perform in a certain venue, but then the night before the event, the venue burns down and you can't perform there anymore. Or even in these times where we have COVID, right? So what if one day the COVID situation in Singapore gets worse, and then we need to stop people from going to physical venues or carrying out physical workshops? So, but that's what you agreed to do in the contract. Then what's going to happen in this situation? So you want to try to think of potential emergencies or situations that could crop up that could prevent you from performing your obligations, and then providing backup plans for these as far as possible. So maybe in the case of illness, you might want to put in a contract that in the event that the trainer is too ill to conduct this workshop, the trainer will do their best to find a replacement trainer, or else it will work with the client to have a workshop postponed to a later date. And finally, a dispute resolution. So in the event that disputes do crop up, how are they going to be resolved? So maybe you want to have a clause to say that both parties will agree to negotiate in good faith, or basically negotiate sincerely to come to an amicable resolution to the dispute. Or maybe you want to say that the parties will be able to bring the dispute to the small claims tribunal to have the dispute resolved in court. But of course, when you put down these avenues of dispute resolution, just because they are there, you also need to conduct some cost-benefit analysis to decide whether you actually want to go through with such methods or not. Because let's say you want to bring your claim to court, it's going to take you time, money, and effort to pursue your claim, and this would definitely take up time that you'll be using to service other clients or pursue other business opportunities. So if your claim is for a very small amount, it might not be worth it to actually continue to pursue the claim. Instead, it might be better to just like let it go and then blacklist the client, never work with them again, and then move on. So how long should a contract be? If you've seen those written contracts, it might be like tens or dozens of pages long and full of complicated legal jargon. So there's actually no general rule on how long a contract should be. If you wanted, you could even have your contract be just 1 page or even just a few lines. But just be aware that there's a reason why contracts are so long, because the lawyers who wrote these contracts are trying to plug all the loopholes that they can possibly find, which means being as precise as possible with their terms. So you can have a short contract, but just be aware that you are sacrificing some precision in the scope of your agreement, which might give some opening for uncertainties and disputes to arise. Right, so at this point, if you've been convinced of the importance of having a written contract, you might be thinking, but I don't have any legal knowledge, I don't know how to draft a contract. In this case, don't worry, because you won't need to start with a blank page. Actually, the Ministry of Manpower does have this free contract resource that you can tap on. I put the link up on the slides, but I don't think you can click it. So you can also go to this page by Googling MOM, what is a contract of service? And it will bring you to this page with the title is what is a contract of service? And then when you scroll down, you'll reach this section that says Key Terms of Engagement Template for Self-Employed Persons. So self-employed persons just refers to people who work for themselves instead of being hired by a company as an employee. So as a freelancer, you work for yourself, so you are considered a self-employed person. And then when you go to this MOM webpage, there'll be a link for you to download a free template for self-employed contracts. If you look at this template, it's actually like a table with different rows and columns. So it'll tell you what you should be filling in. So maybe on top you fill in the details of the parties, followed by the deliverables, followed by the fees, and then you can also put in your confidentiality and IP terms. So you can use this template as a starting point for your contracts. But as your business grows, I also suggest that you consider engaging a lawyer to have your contracts professionally drafted. Because lawyers, as a professional, they will know exactly how to word the terms to prevent ambiguity, and it will cost you maybe about a few $1,000s to have a contract drafted, depending on how complex it is. And this can sound like quite a lot, but then I like to think of it as you're making an investment in your business, and provided that you are going to provide the similar kind of work to clients like many times, then this investment is worth it, because the more times you use this contract, the cheaper it sort of gets over the long run. So this is something to think about if you are seriously looking at growing your business. Right, so now I'll come to the third section on how to deal with difficult clients, because if you freelance for long enough, I think you will definitely come across difficult clients, and it's important to know how to deal with them to make your life easier. So I'm going to go through 3 different difficult client situations. The first one is that you have multiple points of contact. So which means that you have this client and then you've been taking instructions from this person in the client organization, but then someone else comes to you and also tries to give you instructions, which is okay, but then the problem arises if the instructions they give you conflicts with what the other person already told you. And then so in this case, whose instructions are you going to follow when carrying out the project? And also, let's say you need to explain things more than once to multiple people. Like at the start of a project, you've already briefed this person, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is what I'm going to need from you. And then you think that everything is great because you already communicated all your requirements to the client. But then a few days later, someone else from the same organization asks you the same thing, or something that you already answered in a previous meeting. This is quite annoying, right? Because you've already explained yourself once, but then now you need to repeat yourself to this new person. And this can be quite disruptive to the project also, because again, you don't know who you should be talking to, getting instructions to, communicating to. So in this case, how can you deal with this situation is to insist on having only one point of contact. Like, so you take instructions from only this person and not from any other person. And then if anyone else tries to ask you something, say, sorry, I'm currently speaking to this X person who is my point of contact, so I will be liaising with only this person. I came across this situation a while back. I think the point of contact for my client was going on maternity leave, and then she had 2 colleagues who were going to take over her in her absence. And so she introduced these 2 colleagues to me and said, oh, they'll be like liaising with you while I'm away. But then I said, I think it's better if we have only one point of contact, for the reasons I mentioned just now about how it's easier for me to communicate only one person, make sure that I get the right instructions, there's no conflict instructions. And so with that information, my original point of contact discussed it with her colleagues, and then they eventually decided, okay, only this person will be my point of contact and not the other person. And so from there, when my original point of contact was on maternity leave, I had a pretty smooth experience working with her replacement, because there was just one point of contact instead of multiple. And then the second difficult client situation is that your point of contact isn't the decision maker. So this is especially more common in larger organizations where your point of contact is further down the organizational chart. They're sort of doing the work while the person who is actually making all the decisions are higher up and not the person that you are dealing with. And so this might be a problem because what your point of contact tells you might not be in line with what the decision maker wants. Like maybe due to miscom, the point of contact relate the instructions wrongly, or they tell you what they think, but this is not the same as what the decision maker thinks. And so there's a problem, right? Because you do the work according to what the point of contact tells you, but then after that, the point of contact shows your work to the decision maker, and then the decision maker says, oh, but this is actually not what I had in mind, and then you need to redo. So it's like you have to spend even more time to do the project according to what the actual person wanted. So how can you deal with all this? So basically just to make sure that what the point of contact tells you is what the decision maker wants. Like if needed, ask your point of contact, like, is this what the person higher up wants? And then if possible, if needed, try to speak with the decision maker directly. So it's just basically you hear from the horse's mouth themselves. So there's like less chance of you getting the wrong information, and so that you can deliver the project exactly as what is required of you, as according to who is the person who is deciding whether your project passes or fails. And at the same time, you maybe also want to limit the number of changes you will accommodate for projects. So this is just to help make sure that the decision maker cooperates with you, because if you say that I'm only going to make up to 2 rounds of changes for free and subsequently I'm going to charge, and then the decision maker might think, oh no, so if I have to keep changing this project, it's going to cost me more in the future. So okay, I think I will speak to this freelancer and tell them exactly what I want, like, by myself, so that we can quickly settle this project and I don't need to fork out more money to fix the project. And then the third client situation is that your client might request for multiple changes. So you've already done the work, and then the client comes back to you and tells you, oh, sorry, this is not what I want, so, and can you make these changes? And then so you're like, fine, okay, so I make the changes. And then you submit the work again, and then the client goes again, sorry again, can you make these other set of changes? And this gets even more annoying when, let's say, the changes requested is not to your new changes, but to some existing work which the client actually approved in it before, but then now they're saying, oh, sorry, can you change this now? And I guess if you are charging an hourly rate for your services, like, it's fine, like you can just make all the changes that they want, because they are going to pay for your time anyway. But then if you're charging flat fees, like for your project, the more changes you have to make, the less profitable the project becomes for you. Like instead of making maybe $100 per hour on an hourly basis, then your hourly rate drops to $50 or even less. So you want to prevent this from happening in the first place, and you can do so by imposing a cap on the number of free changes you will make. And this is also where a written contract is very important. So at the start, you agree with your client that as part of my services, I will provide, let's say, up to 1 round revisions for free. And then if we need more changes afterwards, I'm going to charge X amount, so maybe like 10% of the project fee. And it might also take me X number of days if we need to do more changes apart from what is out of the scope of the project. So this is for changes that are within the scope of the project. But there are some changes that you ask to make that are so substantial, it's like totally changing the scope of the project. Like maybe you're asked to do a workshop on this topic, but then afterwards, you already prepared the slides and materials for this workshop. But then afterwards, the client comes and tell you, oh, sorry, can you do a workshop on this other topic instead? And then this topic is like substantially different from the workshop that you had prepared to conduct. And so you basically need to like redo all your slides and materials. So in this case, you need to be very firm with the client that, or you know, previously this is what we agreed on. We agreed that I will be conducting a workshop on this topic. Now you want me to conduct a workshop on this other topic instead, which is possible. Like I'm happy to do so, but then it's going to take me this amount of time to make the changes, and it's also going to cost this much more. And so are you comfortable with this? Are you okay to go ahead? And then you wait and you let the client decide whether they want to go ahead with the change scope of the project or not. So I guess end of the day, even though you might face difficult clients, you want to try and make sure you don't burn bridges as far as possible. Always be polite and be respectful, even though you might be very annoyed. Always try to maintain a professional front. But then if there are some clients who are particularly nasty, you can reconsider whether you still want to work with them in the future or not. Yeah, at the end of the day, just remember that even though the client is the one paying you for your services, they don't hold all the cards, because they are engaging you because they need a specific service from you. And so in that case, you also have some bargaining power that you can use to get what you want and get a fair outcome for yourself for this project. Okay, and finally, come to my last point on automating your processes. So I came across this quite recently, I think, but it sort of changed my life. So I want to share about this also. Basically, is that if you find yourself doing a lot of repetitive tasks, you should try to automate them as far as possible, because this will help you save time. Or even if the tasks themselves don't take a lot of time to do, but every time you do them, it's very repetitive, very menial. It's going to take up some of your energy and your time, and so it kind of like saps away your mental energy that you could have been using for tasks that actually require more brain power, like your actual project work, rather than all these small miscellaneous tasks. So I think it's best if I illustrate what I mean with examples from my own automated workflows to give you a better understanding of what I mean. So as mentioned, I'm a freelance writer, and I'm going to share some of the simplified workflows that I have that I custom built for the apps that I use in the course of my freelance business. The software I use to make all these automations are quite customizable. So even if you don't use the same apps that I use, you can also custom build your automations to fit the apps that you use. So I'll just go through, let's say I have a new project from a client. And then what I'll first do is that I'll add this project to my Airtable database of projects. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Airtable, but it's kind of like spreadsheets, but a more powerful form of spreadsheets, because you can upload documents to your tables, and there are also different views. So maybe you can view your projects in calendar form or in different statuses according to the Gantt chart. And so when I add a new project to my Airtable database of projects, I basically fill in a form, like a Google form, to say this is the name of the project, is for this client, it is due on this date, and how much I'm being paid for this project. And then when I submit this form to add a new project to Airtable, my automation is set up to also create a new to-do task in Todoist which is my to-do list app. So I have this app that has a list of all the tasks I need to do for a certain day, a certain week, a certain month, and for different categories as well. So there'll be a new to-do task set up in my app to say that I have this new project and it's due on this day. So when I open my app, my to-do list app for that day, I will say, okay, I have a project that is due today and I need to submit it by today. And at the same time, after this, my to-do list is linked to my Google Calendar. So afterwards, my Google Calendar will also have a new event for the due date of the project that says that I have this project that is due on this day. So I can view in calendar view a snapshot of which days I have to submit which projects. And then after this, using the same workflow, because I use the Xero accounting software, so my automation will automatically create a new draft invoice for this project in Xero. And so the Xero invoice will say it's going to bill this particular client, and then the invoice date will be the due date of the project. And the invoice will also state which items I'm billing for in this invoice, which is basically the new project which I've set up. And it's saved as draft because I'm not ready to send the invoice yet. And then because I keep all my freelance work in Google Drive, so this same automation, it will create a new folder in Google Drive for this project. So what it first does is that it goes to Google Drive, it finds my folder for all my freelance projects, and then from there, it finds the folder that has the client's name on it. And then it opens this folder with the client's name, and in there, it'll create a new folder for just this project. And finally, after that new project folder has been created, my automation will open up that folder and create a copy of my article draft template in that project folder. So because I find that when I'm writing, there's like a certain template that I can follow. So I've already put this template as a Google Doc. And then every time I have a new project, my automation will automatically make a copy of this article draft template and put it into the right folder that was also automatically created for me without my intervention. So as a result of this, when I want to start writing for this project, I don't need to bother about all this. I can just go into my Google Drive, I open the client folder, open a new project folder, then I find this article draft template, and then I open it and I can start writing immediately. So it's quite powerful. And then likewise for completed projects. So let's say if I'm billing for the work after I've submitted it to the client. So if you remember previously, I had a draft invoice that was set up. So before I send it out, I'll just do a quick check to make sure that it's correct. Like, so it's billing to the right client, and then I can change the price of the project if needed. So maybe like, let's say the project scope changed. So what I initially put as the fee project for the fee is not what the project fee is now. So I can change that. And also so previously my automation was set up to put the invoice date as the project due date, which assumes that I'm submitting the invoice on the same day that the project is due. But if let's say I managed to finish the project ahead of time, so I also want to invoice ahead of time, and then I can just change the invoice date to the earlier date. So after I check the invoice and I send it out, I have a separate automation that does the following for me. So previously, I had one automation to set up a task in Todoist to tell me that I need to submit this work on this date. Well, this other automation will automatically mark this task as done, so I don't need to do it myself. And then because I'm a freelance writer, I also like to check to see the published versions of my articles after they've been approved. So my automation will also create a new to-do task to remind myself to check for the published article maybe in like 3 or 7 days time, depending on how long I know this client will take to approve and publish my article. And then at the same time, the same information will be used to update my Airtable. So it will upload a PDF copy of the invoice to my Airtable project database, and also update the database with the latest info about the project. So maybe like invoice number, and if the invoice date has changed, this will automatically be reflected in my Airtable as well, along with the invoice fee. And because Airtable itself also lets you set up automations, so I have one automation which will keep track of the invoice due date for me, and then I have a rule that says if it has been one day after the invoice due date and I have not received payment, then I'm supposed to get a Slack notification to notify me that the invoice has not been paid, so I can immediately follow up. So this way I don't need to memorize like, okay, my invoices are due on this date, this date, this date. Rather, Airtable just keeps track of everything for me, and then when I get this notification, then I can decide whether I want to follow up with the client or not. In case you're not familiar with Slack, it's kind of like WhatsApp but for office communication. And I use Slack because I don't want to keep cluttering my email inbox. I prefer to just get phone notifications that after I read, I can swipe and forget about it if needed. Alternatively, if you don't use Slack, you can always change this to an email notification instead. But as I mentioned, I don't want to clutter my inbox, so I'm using Slack instead. And these are the two software that I use to automate my workflows. They're called Integromat and Zapier. They both have free versions, so you can try them out. But I'm using the paid version because after I tried the free versions, I found that they're quite powerful and the paid versions were worth it, so I upgraded. Between the two, I would say that they're both good in the sense that you don't need to have much programming knowledge in order to set up your automations. They make the process quite easy for you. And between the two, I think that Zapier is easier to use. It's more user friendly, but at the same time, it's also more expensive. On the other hand, Integromat is kind of the opposite. So it's cheaper, but it is more powerful, and it lets you automate a wider range of things. But because that is also a bit more complex to use, you do need to know a little bit more of like programming language, or at least understanding of how programming code works. Yeah, and with that, I've come to the end of my presentation, and happy to take questions if there are any.